Director at the Cape Town office for Oxfam. Welcome to the second webinar series for the Transformational Women's Leadership. And this has been something that has been going on since around April this year. The first set of webinars concentrated on feminisms, and this one, which will run from now until about June 2014, and will be interspaced by probably once a month or once every second month, will focus on featuring transformational approaches and practices and strategies in different contexts. And thus we're looking at the intersectionality between transformative practices and looking at it in trying to combat as a means to combat injustice and claiming rights and reducing poverty. So today it's really wonderful to see so many people online, and welcome to those who, for you, might be the first time for joining us. A warm welcome to you. Our facilitator for today and as well for the next webinar, which will happen on the 2nd of December, is Elaine Salo, who is the Director for Women and Gender Studies at the University of Pretoria. Elaine was also our facilitator in the previous webinar series. I'd also just like to take the opportunity to remind you about our blog. Please link after our conversation where we can have more conversations. And I think I sent this blog link in the first invitation that was sent out. But for now, I'd like to hand over to Nick, who will take us through some of the technical aspects for the webinar. So I'll hand over to you, Nick. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Renee. Good day all. My name is Nick, as you now know, and I will be supplying basic tech support for this webinar. Although I emailed out a step-by-step process going over what you as attendees need to know to participate in this webinar, I will obviously now go through it once more. Please bear in mind that as attendees, you're currently muted, so we cannot hear you if you speak into your mics. The organizers and presenters have the ability to share their screen with you. When this happens, the white window that is currently displaying the webinar's name will change to show the presenter's screen. It is through this that the presenters will share their PowerPoints. As an attendee, you will have a toolbar in the top right-hand side of your screen. With this toolbar, you can access two important things. The first is the raise hand button. If during the allocated question time you have a question or wish to make a comment, select this button and it will highlight you to the facilitator and organizers. We will then unmute you. The second is the option to type in a question that will be seen by the facilitator and organizers. So if you have a non-functional mic or prefer to type out the question or have just any general questions, please use that button. Elaine, our facilitator, will verbally inform all attendees when presenters will be taking questions. At this point, you may either type and then submit with the pose question option or raise your hand using the raise hand button. And as I say, wait to be unmuted by our facilitator in order to ask your question verbally. Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to Elaine, our facilitator.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome to everybody. At this point, I'm going to be introducing our two speakers. First of all, we have Carmen Lowe, who is a program coordinator for Women on Farms. And she will present first for about 20 minutes. After that, we have Mersha Andrews, who is the National Coordinator in the Trust for Community Outreach and Education. But before I allow Carmen and Mersha to start presenting, I am going to unmute each one of you step by step so you can introduce yourselves. The first one up is Hafisa Nkise. Please, Hafisa, if you can introduce very quickly yourself and your organization. Nick, I'm assuming you've handed over control to me. Nick?
In the attendee list, you simply click on the green microphone next to their name and it will unmute them.
Okay. Okay. Okay, Hafisa. Hello, Curtis. Could you introduce?
My name is Kobus. I'm from Tulubazi Zivakile in northern KZN. Unfortunately, I'm struggling to hear some of the things, so there's some things that I cannot hear.
If there are any problems, you can also type responses. Let's Paulo Langa. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello? Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
You can see.
Hi. My name is Letulanga. We're from Art for Humanity. And we also having trouble hearing you guys. And Hafsa also couldn't respond because she can't hear properly.
If you're having a problem, maybe just you can just type, or hopefully we'll have a moment where the connection gets better. I'm going to move on to Nosipo Twala. Nosipo, you're been unmuted. Could you please introduce yourself? I'm Nosipo Twala from Women's Forum. We're also struggling with we can't hear properly. Hello? People, I can hear you. If you're faint, but I can hear you. But hopefully the connection will improve. Can you introduce yourself and your organization, please? Pateka Mutsilana.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
We can hear you, Pateka.
Hello, Pateka. We can hear
Hello.
you.
Can you hear me? Hello. I'm Pateka. I'm Tintilana.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? The line is bad.
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me. My name is Pateka Mtintilana from Loaves and Fishes Network in East London, in the Eastern Cape.
To everybody, please bear in mind that the connection varies. We had this issue during the last webinar series as well. Just bear in mind you do have the option to type either your introduction or your questions. But right now I'm going to hand over to our presenters. First to Carmen. Welcome, Carmen, and we'll have you present for about 15 to 20 minutes, and that will be followed by a period of question time and participation from our other participants, and then Rasha will follow you. Carmen, you can go ahead with your presentation. I'm going to mute myself now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Elaine. I'm Carmen Lowe. I'm Program Coordinator for an organization called Women on Farms Project. We work on commercial farms and in rural towns in the Western Cape and Northern Cape. We focus basically, we work with women farm dwellers and farm workers to assist them in building their capacity and developing leadership potential. Well, Women on Farms Project is a feminist organization, and our overall mission is to strengthen the capacity of farm women to claim their rights and to transform the communities in which they live and work. Okay. What do we want? What do we like to see in the communities that we work? We want to see that all women are treated with respect and dignity, and that women have secure employment, access to food, basic services, and water, and housing. Also that women's health rights are protected, as well as an end to domestic violence or gender-based violence in the communities, and especially on farms. Also, we would like to see that women have a healthy social life in the agricultural communities in which they live and work, and that the environment is preserved for future generations. In the communities or in the areas that we work, it's largely large-scale commercial farming that's taking place, and we would like to see a change, the agricultural environment transform to a less carbon input and ecological friendly environment. And then mostly we would like to see women operate and function independently. So what are the strategies that we follow to develop women's leadership? We assist in the formation of women's structures or women's rights groups. And in the structures, women share experiences, they deal with problem cases, and they encourage women to be part of the social network that is formed through the structures. Also, we assist women and encourage them to advocate and to lobby for what they would like to see and for change and transformation in the communities. But because we work with in specific areas to amplify the voice of women, we encourage women to network with like-minded organizations, and we assist them in doing that. The areas that we work in are based on the needs that we've learned over the years of working on. Initially, we started as women's rights groups who focus mainly on gender-based violence and basic women's rights. But through our work with women on commercial farms, we saw that there is a need for more rights-based education and capacity building, especially in the areas of land rights, labor rights, and also in health and empowerment. That is what we started with. But through our work, we also discovered, because we work mostly with seasonal farm workers who are unemployed for a large part of the year, and they experience hunger or food insecurity for certain months of the year. And that's why we started the Women's Cooperative Program, to ensure that women are provided for during the off-season months. But it also gives women a certain sense of economic independence, which makes them less dependent on their male partners and on the farmers, and thereby decreasing their vulnerability to gender-based violence. So, how do we assist women in developing their leadership potential? We have what we call education and capacity building sessions through information sessions and workshops. But most of all, we encourage women to take responsibility for their own change. So once we've established or assisted in establishing of the structures, women must meet on their own. They must have their own meeting, decide their own agenda, and then develop their own campaigns and programs. We also facilitate a process where women actively participate in public engagements and engagements with government at different levels. For example, portfolio committee meetings or meetings with the municipality around basic services and so forth. But most of all, we also promote self-reliance and independent functioning of structures, as I've mentioned earlier. We also encourage women to participate in advocacy and lobbying. Although various gains have been made since our democracy, we find that the laws are not adequately protecting women. So in order to make the changes to ensure that women's rights are effectively protected, we continue to encourage women to state what is still lacking in current legislation and how to address those. So we do that by having sessions where women discuss the lacks in the current legislation and forward their demands. We do that by formal submissions, but also by handing over memorandums and petitions to government, to parliament, and to local municipalities. We also support initiatives that will ensure that women's is economically independent, like, for example, we've assisted with the establishment of women's cooperatives and also food gardens to ensure household food security. Also, with the help of our partners, there are learning exchanges. The photos that you see are learning exchange to Cuba, which was a three-country learning exchange between South Africa, Cuba, and Mozambique. We women especially engage with women's cooperatives in the small-scale farming. They learned not only about the various things, how to run a cooperative, the economic side, but also how to share seeds and the government's policy, agroecological policy, which are prevalent in all the areas that we visited. And then on the one photo you can see that is on the mountains, Sierra Maestra Mountains, where Fidel Castro's where he conducted his final battle from. So women within the structures are part of our organization's decision making. They serve on the board, WFP's board, and they also participate in the mid and end of year reflections and planning. So they discuss what worked through the year and what programs which they like to see on campaigns which they like to see for the remaining of the year and for the next year. They're also very critical what did not work, and they reflect on best practices as well. We also create spaces where women join forces with other women to strengthen the plight and amplify the voice of women. Two of those structures are the Farm Worker Rights Coalition and the Rural Women's Assembly. The Farm Worker Rights Coalition is a mixed group which comprises of both males and females, where the issues of farm workers in general are discussed, and it's largely based in the Western Cape, and it gained momentum during the farm workers' strike to assess and to plan and to coordinate the activities of the farm workers to make sure that maximum attention is given to all the demands of the farm workers. The other is the Rural Women's Assembly, which is a women's only gathering. It started in 2009 as a Southern African Rural Women's Assembly, and thereafter the women in the different countries started to launch as independent rural women's assemblies. South Africa launched its Rural Women's Assembly during October this year as a national body where women, not only farm women, but women from small rural communities across South Africa will convene and talk about the issues, for example, patriarchy on the farms, but also in traditional rural communities. But our next presenter, Mersha, will talk more about that. So that last photo is the photo where we can see the different banners where the women from the different parts of the country came together at Parliament to hand over their petition for the demands, and the demands range from land was the central thing that connected all, but also gender-based violence in traditional communities that is controlled by traditional leaders. Also the question of GMOs. The memorandum stated no to GMOs and yes to traditional seeds and indigenous plants, to name but a few of the demands. Okay, Elaine, I'm done. I'll give over to you now again.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Please, people, if there's anyone, I didn't get a response to my typed question, so asking whether you could hear Carmen clearly. So I'm assuming everybody can hear Carmen. I think Carmen's raised very important issues around consultative forms of leadership and consultations around women being in non-hierarchical relationships and forming networks across time. But right now I'm going to ask you either to use the screen on your right hand to raise your hands, or you can type your question, or I can unmute you if you wish to speak to the question. But preferably it's best for you just to do a raised hand, and that means you click on the raised hand if you have any questions or issues of discussion to raise with Carmen. I don't, okay, we seem to have a question from Letu, but no, this is an old response. No questions? Any issues or points for discussion? Thinking from your own examples and the own spaces that you're working in, or networks that you and your organization might be located in? Okay, I know that this is a relatively new software to some people. So right now, if we don't have any questions for Carmen, thank you for that. I just want to again raise some of the issues that Carmen has raised with regards to transformational leadership. First of all, she pointed out the importance of self-reliance, but also and creating an enabling environment for women to speak. And Carmen, from where I sit, I wanted to know more about how you go about encouraging the women. What are the processes, and what you women on farms would consider as an enabling environment, because you move from that obviously to one of self-reliance, and then the importance of networking. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to those issues right now. I am going to mute myself and unmute you, Carmen. Your,
There was one question, Elaine. Do I need to answer that now? What form does the mid and end of year reflections take? Representatives from all the structures and all the areas attend the reflection together with the staff, and then each program must present what they've done for the past 6 months or what they've done for the year, and reflect what worked and what didn't work, and from there plan for the next 6 months or for the next year.
Thanks for that, Carmen. There is another question too from Quibus, which asks, how do you define feminist?
Feminist is where women develop from where they are to where they would like to be, and where the concerns and the needs of women are put first. Some examples of feminist practices that enable women to participate is that we apply is to make sure that women are free to bring their children to workshops and to engagements that Women on Farms organize. We create the environment and the space for that. Also, we encourage women to attend development sessions and trainings, to name those examples.
We have another question from Pateka. Pateka, you are unmuted.
Hello. Renee, my question is, what has been the response from the women at home? When you've developed and you've given them a capacity, what has been the response from their homes or their partners, whatever?
Well, it differs. In certain communities, we work with women that are off farm. In the migrant communities, it's very difficult for women to attend weekend workshops because their partners won't allow them. In other communities, it also depends on the program. If it's the cooperatives program and the food garden program, women are encouraged at home. But when it's the program that deals with women's empowerment and gender-based violence, there are a bit of resistance. So in some cases, women ask staff members to come and explain to partners what the program is all about, what Women on Farms is all about, and then and also explain to them that no men are involved, so that they can feel that women are allowed to go. So it's a building process. Initially, we will do that until women are capacitated to explain for themselves why they need to be part of a structure and of the programs. There was also another question which links to the male question.
We have a question from Leslie.
There's another question that says, are men involved in any aspects? We don't directly involve men in our programs, but in cases of evictions and dismissals, we will deal with the casework, because once a male partner is dismissed, it affects the whole family. It will affect the woman and the children. So they are not directly involved in our programs, but we will assist in certain casework. And then there's a question.
We have a question from Letu.
On the agricultural skills like farming, is that question? We don't. Correct. Yeah. We don't only develop agricultural skills, and the agricultural skills that we develop is agroecology skills, but that is only part of our program. And the question is creative skills like arts and poetry writing. All staff went through the training for transformation development module, and also this year we had the opportunity also to train 60 of our women in that, which is a very creative way and where women can express themselves creatively. Also, as part of a Rural Women's Assembly, where only women get together, there's poetry, there's dancing, there's painting. So women have the opportunity to express themselves in a way that they are comfortable with, and we encourage creative ways of expressing women's needs and women's victories.
Thanks, Carmen. I'm going to unmute Mozipa. Mozipa Twala, please can you express your question? Mozipa, you have been unmuted. You had your hand raised. I'm assuming you have a question.
Hi, this is Jamile. I just want to know how to they manage co-op after forming them, because most of the time you find that after forming a co-op, women they fight, so we have the challenge. So I think we want to know how do they manage co-op.
Well, I had problems hearing that question. Could you speak up loudly and repeat your question again, please? Difficulty hearing you. Are you able to type your question? Can you type your question, because I'm having problems hearing you, and I'm assuming other people too. Nozipa, I'm afraid I can't hear. Okay. I can't seem to, I'm having problems with the question from Nozipa. So Nozipa, if you can just type your question clearly, it just has one word on my screen. I'm not sure what's happening.
There's a question.
Okay. I think we're having a problem with Nozipa's mic, and I'm not understanding the written question. So, Nozipa, I'm going to ask you to hold your question for later, and I'm going to now turn to, okay, I've got Nozipa's question up. Fantastic, thanks. Nozipa asks, how do they manage cooperatives after forming them? So the issue is clearly here in the sustainability of cooperatives after they've been found. Respond to Nozipa's question?
Yes, Elaine. The cooperatives are independent structures, but for a time after the cooperative is formed, Women on Farms will lend technical support, mentoring. There will be mentoring and assistance visits, and if they have any problems, we'll assist them. But we'll define an exit strategy or an exit time frame after which they will be on their own.
Thanks for that comment. Just to follow on Nozipa's questions, is there more than one co-op that you assist in managing, and what have been the issues where you've seen co-ops sustain, and what have been the issues where you've seen co-ops fail?
At the moment, we are assisting. Yes, at the moment we are assisting 3 cooperatives. There is one that went independent already, a 4th one. What sustains our relationship with co-ops is to be open and frank and to document all engagements. Some of the challenges of the co-ops, especially with the women on farms, is the only model of management is the patriarchal or the boss worker model. So we find that although we encourage a cooperative system of operation, some women tend to be more dominant leaders and would like to control the group. So those are the interventions that we, or the challenges that we must deal with to ensure that there is equality and that there is sharing of roles and responsibilities.
Carmen, just on another note, okay, we've got a question from Jenny. Jenny says, she first apologizes for being late. Sorry, Jenny, I'm just thinking, Jenny, I've unmuted you. Maybe you want to just...
Sorry, I've lost you. Elaine, I didn't hear you.
Been unmuted.
Okay, I'm Jenny Bell. I'm from Justice and Women in KZN. Is that what can you hear me? Sorry, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
We can hear you loud and clear, Jenny.
Can hear you very clearly.
Okay. Well, the question I'm asking really is about the issue of self-reliance. And I'm just really wanting to try and understand how Carmen sees that as a feminist practice and why it's important. So, and I'm not sure if you covered that in your initial explanation. And I was wondering also how self-reliance, was it also self-validation or was it a different sense of self-reliance?
Okay, I didn't hear all of that. There was a break in the transmission.
Okay. What I'm asking is, I see that you talked about self-reliance earlier when I joined you as part of a feminist, one of the practices that you have encouraged. And what I'm trying to understand is what is your meaning of self-reliance? How do you see that as a feminist practice? And is the self-reliance really about a greater sense of self? So I'm really just trying to understand what you see as self-reliance.
Self-reliance is where women are able to operate independently from the organization and are able to develop their own, depending if it's the cooperative, it is to develop their own economic means to sustain themselves and their families.
For that, Carmen, I'm sure Jenny will take that up again during the longer discussion. We've got a question from Letu, but Letu, you've been unmuted, so maybe you want to please pose your question to Carmen.
No, I've already sent my question. I don't know how it got sent back again.
I'll pose it on your behalf. Carmen, Letu asks, does your organization only focus on developing agricultural skills? Like, oh, sorry, we've had that. I'm talking, Pateka is the person. Pateka's question is, how long do you stay with cooperatives before they are independent? So clearly the issue about dependence on women on farms is an issue here. Carmen, you can go ahead and answer Pateka's question.
It depends on the Pateka's question how long. Well, it depends on the nature of the cooperative. Sometimes it's 1 year, sometimes it's 3 years, depending on the assistance that the women require. But ideally, it would be between 1 and 2 years.
Thanks, Carmen. Can you speak about what are the signs when cooperatives can be considered?
Well, if they are able to produce on their own, if they are able to secure markets on their own, and if they are able to, if we see that the financial management is accurate and accountable. So, and also we'll have the discussion with them to engage with them to determine whether they feel comfortable to operate independently from women on farms.
Carmen, we've got another comment from Nozipo. Nozipo, I am unmuting you, so go ahead and pose your question.
About transformational leadership is painful at times. Yes, it is, but it involves, it's an evolving process. So what we have in the organization is continuous discussions. There's also feminist training to regularly assess what do we understand from feminism and how far did the organization come with its feminist agenda. So we will look at our strategies, revise it, and adapt it to see and to accommodate what is necessary in this day and age. Because there's no clear feminist strategy that can apply to a particular environment. So we need to develop and carve what we understand of feminism and what works for us. And from there, take it step by step. So it's not a rigid, cast in stone agenda.
Okay, clearly, I mean, from what you are indicating here, Carmen, as well as from Nozipo's question, there's clearly a common assumption here about forming that feminist agenda from below. Is that correct?
Elaine, can I just add also, our feminist strategy is developed at different levels. It's developed at the local level, the structure level, right up to the board. So within, on the board, as I explained, we have members from the structures that serves as board members. We also have outside facilitation that monitors the board meetings to ensure that the board meetings are not in a traditional dominant style that we are used to of meetings, but that it is transformative and that it's more reflects the feminist side of what we're trying to do. Also, at an organizational level, responsibilities are shared, meetings are chaired by everyone. Every staff member, from the office assistant to the director, are responsible for a staff meeting during the year, setting the agenda, introducing a skill development session, and the same with our reflections. Structure Women, Farm Women has the opportunity to facilitate parts of the end and mid-year reflections, to also encourage them to take up the leadership position. And also our reflections are very, very creative, so we don't do things in the traditional way. So women must come up with creative ways in which to facilitate and do presentations. So those are some of the practices that we try to introduce to move away from the traditional male-orientated way of running things, doing things.
Okay, thanks, Carmen. Jenny has a question here. She wants to know how do you decide whether these are co-ops? How are these co-ops? So basically, what is your definition of a co-op?
Is that the question? Co-ops, it's women that will come together and then they'll indicate that they would like to form a co-op and to start their own cooperative to generate economic income. And they will decide what it is. They will approach us and we will sit with them and help them to develop a plan and a program.
Okay, and in terms of Women on Farms notion of a definition of co-op, do you have some operational
I didn't get that, Elaine.
I guess Jenny's asking about a co-op, about an operational definition of a co-op.
I cannot hear that question.
Jenny, I don't know to you, maybe you can.
Okay. What I'm really trying to understand is cooperatives are essentially, my understanding of cooperatives is that they're structures that are governed completely by the members. And so, as you're saying,
I
that
didn't
members
get all of that, Elaine.
Okay. That I understand from my understanding of cooperatives that they are structures completely governed by the members. That the members share, as you're saying, in decision making and equally in distribution of the profit. But they also then share in the planning for the next year and putting aside money for the next year. They also, from what I understand traditionally, is they take up social issues in those cooperatives. And I just wondered, you know, is this the kind of cooperative that you're running at Women or that Women on Farms is promoting?
There is a break in connection, so I get parts of the question, but not the complete question.
Basically, I've typed up the question. Let me just, Jen, I'm going to mute you again. Basically, what Jenny's asking is, she understands a co-op as mutually operated by the members, controlled by the members, profits are shared, decisions are made by the members, and the members raise social issues within the cooperative. Is that the
only got
model?
part of the question.
Okay,
Can you repeat that, Elaine, please?
Okay, if you look at the chat button at the bottom, Jenny's question says co-ops are governed by the members, they share in the control of the members, and they share in the social issues. Is that the model you are working with? Carmen, I'll ask you to take up the issue around the definition of women on farms and let it follow us next question later. I think we'll move on to Mersha now, but from the Rene's control, which has Mersha and both Carmen, they're saying they cannot hear. So Nick, I'm not sure what to do about this.
I think it might be connection problems on the Cape Town side, because I'm hearing Jenny, yourself, and everyone very, very clearly in Durban. So I don't know, because there's been storms that have been happening all over, so that might be interfering. I'm not too sure though. Unfortunately, if it is storms, then as awesome as I think I am, I cannot control the weather, so that is a little bit outside of my technical help.
Okay, Nick, my end it says that the person is self-muted. So could you, you know, I think they may have mistakenly on Rene's, okay. It says she can hear now. I'm going to ask Mersha to present now. Mersha, can you hear me?
Yes, very well, thank you. Can you hear me?
Okay, Mersha. Yes, perfectly. I'm going to mute myself. We'll to Jen and to Letu Tolo. We'll put your questions to Carmen on hold and move immediately onto Mersha and take all of the questions later on. Thanks, Mersha.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me as part of the program today. So I work for an organization called the Trust for Community Outreach and Education. It's like, instead we're an organization focusing mainly on rural development and the land question, etc.
Okay, then Mersha, Rene, and Carmen, my button says you're self-muted. Can you try to unmute yourself?
Elaine, can you get me here? Shall I start again? Shall I start again, Elaine?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so I'm not sure what you've missed, but I'll start again and I'll say the Trust for Community Outreach, TCOE, is a national rural development organization. We have focus areas, movement building and supporting rural organizations to organize themselves, and we facilitate the development of farmers associations and land rights forums, farm worker forums, etc. The second part of the work is around food sovereignty, and here it's about accessing land, using land in a sustainable way, taking issues of seeds, agricultural methods, and so on into account. And then we also look quite a lot at rural local government and accessing of basic services for the rural poor. And I think lastly, it's about ensuring that we work in solidarity and in partnership with others. So that's a bit of background to the organization, and perhaps to say 2 or 3 things that's in relation to TCOE, but also in relation to today's theme. So even though TCOE is older than 30 years, in the 30-odd years of its existence, it has only had a male director or leader for probably very briefly 2 years in its entire existence. So most of the people in leadership have been women. The organization also has a kind of quota system for the board, 50 men, 50 women, and so on. But the important and the interesting thing about the TCOE and its work on with rural women is that because we're a national organization, it means that we work across several different communities, several different language, people speak different languages, different cultures, different histories, etc. And this does mean that how we engage with issues of feminism, of women's rights, and building women's leadership it often differs across the areas where we work and how we work. So that, I think, is key. Another important part of what we try and do is, because part of our work is also to look quite a lot at advocacy around land and alternatives and so on, is the question of a feminist analysis. So if we are going to be tackling a campaign around access to water for livelihood, for the farming, for the agricultural policies, etc., or if there's a new policy that comes into existence around water rights and so on, we would always begin to ask 2 critical questions. The first is, how does this policy, how does this right impact on the lives of the poor, the rural poor in particular? And secondly, how does this right or this policy or this action by government and everyone else impact on the lives of women? So it's, in a sense, trying to develop a gender or a feminist consciousness where we begin to look at our work through the lens of women and through the lens of the poor. So this, I think, governs all of the things that we do and all of the activities and the campaigns and so on that we are involved in. The same, we would say, after we started to build associations throughout the country, we have facilitated the building of several popular organizations, farm worker forums, small farmers forums nationally as membership organizations, because we believe that these NGOs cannot speak and should not speak for the poor. They must speak for themselves. They have voice. Our task is to strengthen that voice. Our task is to strengthen the agency of the rural poor. So once we started to build these and facilitate the building of these movements, we also began to realize that women often were 60% of the membership and so on, yet women were not often the main voices that we were hearing in the leadership, and women were not the main, women's issues didn't, or women's issues were quite invisible, and hence we started a few years ago, 5 years ago, within these associations to create a special space or rural women's forums where the women themselves could come together, could talk about their issues, and could put their issues on the agenda. So often, if you look at the land question, you would hear these movements talking about the slow pace of delivery, or the fact that you know, land was still in the hands of the majority of South Africans, etc. But they would never say that where we have land, women are not the owners of the land. So we began to find a methodology and a strategy where we could build women's agency and also build women's voice within these movements. And I think this has been an important journey for us. We are still in the process of learning, and we are still in the process of ongoing experimentation. But I think the most important, some of the lessons for us are the following: that we must not assume that in these organizations of men and women that it's automatic that women's voices will be heard. We have to create the conditions and the organizational space for women's voices to be heard, and for them to find the strength of their own voice. I think that's an important aspect. The second thing we've done is to organize an annual school, a kind of leadership school, a women's school, where we can explore issues of what is feminism, what's our reproductive health, our reproductive rights, etc. Learning from other movements and so on. What is the intersectionality between race, class, and gender, and so on. So these are some of the things that we would have as part of the curriculum in the annual school. The school lasts for about 5 to 7 days, and part of that school is also an experimentation with methodology. How do we organize in a way that reflects our difference? And so we would start with very small issues like sitting in circles. Our meetings are in circles as opposed to you know, benches like the church and so on. So we would use the circle. We would make sure that we have the space and the venue always reflecting the banners of the communities, the posters, etc. We would try and create a softer touch within that. We've introduced, and Women on Farms have done a lot of this as well, of yoga and breathing exercises into our spaces. And we often have use action reflection as an important tool. So we would ask questions like, in this march that we had 2 weeks ago, when we marched to Parliament, and you looked at the memorandum that was handed over to Parliament, how many issues in the memorandum spoke to women's positions or women's situations and so on? And we would use those questions and reflections to get women to start to talk and to think about how they often, and we as women, and I include myself, we often are not conscious enough that we give up our space, we give up our issues, we sideline our issues for the broader, bigger issues. And so we try and create a consciousness that this is not what we should be doing. We should be much more focused on making sure our issues are on the agenda as well, and that we take forward not only a collective agenda of the poor, but also within that we take up the issues of rural women and poor women. So I think another important aspect of our work is to raise the issue of traditional authorities, and particularly because we work in the rural areas, this is a very big issue, and we discuss this, and we discuss it from a perspective. I don't live under the rule of traditional authority, so how I enter the conversation is also critical. So I think we begin to say to people, what are the power relations in that village, in the rural areas, what is the role of the chief, what's the role of the headman, etc. And from there we've become quite active in the campaign around the communal land rights bill, etc. So we kind of go from people's experience, and we get people to reflect using different critical analysis, using power analysis, to arrive at a self-criticism of themselves and of the way in which women often remain invisible within these spaces, etc. I think we also bring several other issues onto the agenda in the collective organizing of both the men and the women. So we would put high on the agenda the question of solidarity. We believe that solidarity, how we give expression of solidarity between men and women, and also on women's issues. If there's questions of violence, how do both men and women go together to demonstrate at the magistrate or go to the family, etc. Because it is important that our solidarity is also speaks to the issues that we are unhappy about within our community. So the issue of violence, the issue of polygamy, all of these are issues that we begin to take on board. I think we have found the TCOE through our work in building the Rural Women's Assembly, and here we have we built this in partnership with Women on Farms. Women on Farms, we have a beautiful slogan which says we are the guardians of land, life, seeds and love. And for us, this is what we should put in the foreground as we go. And through the space of the Rural Women's Assembly, both in South Africa and in the region, we've also begun to learn. We've begun to learn many, many critical questions that we all have to address as we build movements. How do we deal with the question of patriarchy within our communities? How do we deal with the question of the traditional authorities? Yesterday and the day before, in Zimbabwe there was a launch of the Rural Women's Assembly, and one of the things I observed as I was there is that when women were handing over gifts to the minister, or like they were kneeling and they were going on their knees to hand over the gift. And my first instinct was to say, this is unacceptable. Why are you kneeling? Get up. Let's stand and hand over the gift. In South Africa, we don't even give the ministers gifts. But of course, it was a completely different context. I had to begin to say, this is an issue that we will have to speak about when we come together, and we will have to ask, how do we change that? What does it mean when when rural women go on their knees? What does it mean when rural women cup their hands in particular ways, etc.? So this issue of culture and how we address it in our organizing and in our building women's voice and women's agency is very, very, very critical. So I think that perhaps part of what we ought to be doing through our work, whether it is as Oxfam or whether it is all of you who are part of this conversation today, is to begin to ask questions about how we define what is an African feminism. Is an African feminism separate from a feminism in general? And do we have women's organizing that is different, to general ways in which we organize? So these are, I think, important questions that we're all grappling with, and that I think in different ways. Similarly, the question of violence. I think the question of violence is an issue that ought to be addressed as women, but also as men and women. You have a situation in South Africa today where the violence in our society, in our community, has become kind of all overwhelming in how it's entered into every facet of our lives. And so we need to ask, how do we deal with this issue? Do we begin to just build stronger women's organizations, or, as someone asked earlier, or do we also begin to take this into every organization, both male and female organization, and then how do we both deal with it separately and collectively? So I think the challenges for movement building, the challenges of building women's leadership are very, very important. A few weeks ago, Women on Farms, Carmen, and others, and we were in a meeting with farm worker women. And it was a really powerful experience for me. Women were asked to dream, to think about their lives, and to think about where they would like to see themselves in 5 years' time. When we started to hear the farm worker women, most of them had no dreams. The situation that they were living under, the situation on the farms, their daily struggle for survival was the dream for the next hour, for the next day, for the next moment. So we are dealing with diverse women in the rural areas, in the countryside, and so these questions of how we build, how we work, and how we learn from each other, I think will be key in shaping kind of answers as we go forward. I'm not sure if I should stop and perhaps, allow people to ask questions. Elaine?
Thank you, Marsha, for that. We have some time for questions. So if people do have questions, please can you type them? While we're waiting, Marsha, while we're waiting, I think the issue of cultural identities and women's issues come up very strongly, and I'm wondering how what comes up in your organization's discussion with women on this. How do they make sense of this? are they able to address this with the traditional authority structures on the ground? Masha, I'm not sure if you can hear my question.
Elaine, just to let you know that you are coming through very clearly. I think the connection problem is on the Cape Town side. I'm not too sure what we can do about it though. Renee says she can hear now, so Elaine, would you like to try and repeat the question?
Thanks, Masha. I'm wanting to know from your organizational experience, how do women deal with the contradictions between their cultural identities and their claim to gender rights, and whether they are able to address the customary authorities in their area around these issues?
So, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, monsieur.
When we had the launch, when we had. Okay, sorry. We're having some. Yes, I couldn't hear. So when we launched the Rural Women's Assembly in South Africa, there was a very big discussion on this very topic. There were those women and all the participants, 270 of them, were all rural women. And you had from, on the one hand, a complete, this is a campaign that we should support. We should support, women's access to land, and our chiefs must go. This is what was said. Yet, in the midst of it, as they were discussing, one of the provinces, I think, or one section of the Northern Cape, for example, said, no, in our area, we don't have these problems with the chiefs and so on. So you often have, I think, where people address the issue from an experience, not as an institution. And I think we still have a way to go in ensuring that people see issues of traditional authority and of patriarchy as part of a system, an institutional system that we have to engage with, and also to see its role in South Africa, present-day role, and so on. And I think this is the beginning of a conversation. So I think that we're probably going to continue with the campaign over the next period, but I think we still have a way to go, because women see daily that their rights are being violated. They see this institution often as not at all in tune with the rights of women, and that it continues to ensure that a particular system within our society is perpetuated, and yet there is other parts of culture, that people see as valuable and should hold on to. So I think these contradictions are going to be with us for a while still.
very much.
How
Jenny,
do we build?
Jenny has exactly. How do
Yes,
we?
I
How
see
do we
Jenny's
build?
question about building women's agency. I think we build women's agency in many different ways. I think the small agencies built through small steps as well as big processes, small steps in getting people to work on chairing a meeting, small steps in getting people to form a women's group in a community and preparing the agenda. Those discuss the violence in our community and to say how do we take action against the violence that we see, and to get women to ask now what are the kinds of steps that we take, how do we build together, and to raise the question inside of organization. As I explained earlier, so if you're part of a farmers association of both men and women, where you have a membership of 4,000 people, you've got to ask, why is it within this association that we do not discuss the question of domestic violence? Why is it in this organization that women are not in the leadership and that men are there, or we are not discussing polygamy, or we're not discussing rape? So I think it's all of those processes together that we have to undertake, because for a long time women in South Africa, I think as elsewhere, have been in the forefront of fighting battles for land, fighting battles for water, etc., etc. And it's often been for the benefit of the collective of both men and women. But the same solidarity or the same spirit of fighting on women's issue, of standing up for women's rights, is not often seen on the side of the men. So how do we build that into the issue? I think it takes time, it takes several actions, and I think it takes women's own spaces and not simply as joint organizations. It's my view in any case. I think also the schools and the raising of consciousness is key. They must understand we live in a society where there is, where we live in a capitalist patriarchal society.
Thanks for that, Nasha. We've got a question from Nozipo Twala. She says, you speak about women sidelining their issues. What strategies do you and the organizations you work with use to ensure that women's issues stay on the agenda?
Well, often we have different ways. We have in all our meetings, the organizational form is to have community meetings, monthly meetings, and so on. And we are encouraging the women's forums to put women's issues on the agenda. We would even caucus to talk about it. Why are children being raped? Why is it that women are not getting land, but the eldest son must get land? Why are we support? So we kind of try and prompt a little that these issues come onto the agenda. And of course, we keep putting these things on the agenda in the schools as well, so that we would say, we need to put these things, we need to not sideline it. When we talk about rape, when we talk about violence, it happens against women, but it all, and children and boys as well, and therefore it must become a community issue, a social issue, so that we can deal with it collectively. Yeah, so it's again, ongoing work at trying to raise the consciousness, trying to build women's confidence, and to stay putting these issues on the agenda as part of the daily work, as part of the methodology.
Okay, thanks for that, Masha. And I'm just wondering, how do the men in the organization respond as the women in these organizations, facilitated by yourselves, insist on women's issues staying on the agenda? What kind of responses have you had from men, from older men, younger men, boys? Have they been supportive? Are they attempts to diminish them in importance?
In some areas, it's not been easy. I give you the example of the TCOE board. So I am the director, and we have nominations for the board meeting, and I would say surely we should have a quota. I'm not in favor of a quota, but if you are not conscious of a quota 50-50 male, female, then I suggest we make a decision about quotas. Then we would spend hours debating the validity of quotas. Should we have quotas? No, we must have merit, etc., etc. And then at the end of it, you allow it to go, and you will see that, you know, if you're going to have merit, and of course I'm always of the view that there are enough strong women who can take up these positions and so on, but they will not be nominated by the men. So until we force these issues, it becomes a discussion, you know, on the agenda, then we're not going to make the change, conscious change. So we've tried to put in place organizational strategies to make the change. So for example, if we're going to have a meeting, a workshop, then we are saying there must be 50% men and 50% women who come. You're not going to only come with 80% men and 20% women. No. So we would really put the issue on the agenda all the time. We would make the same with the resources. So if we are going to be allocating resources for food gardens or for seeds or for training, then we would say it has to be men and women. And we need to have 50-50 in some of these issues. So I think we are, nothing has been smooth, despite the fact that I've said to you in TCOE we've had mainly 90% women in the leadership. We've had to fight for those institutional changes, because I think we must also see organization often as a very big, what is it? It's difficult to change the ship. You know, it's steered in a particular way. Carmen made the point earlier in an earlier conversation. Organizations are often so hierarchical, so male in their persona. So it's everything that you want to change. You have to change both the form, the content, and you've got to really win the battles at every level. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Masha. I don't see any other questions for you. I'm just wondering if you can speak to, you know, the variation in regions where you see men accepting women's, the validity of women's voices, where they are hearing women, and where, in which parts or areas of the country there's difficulty. And what sectors is it proving to be very difficult? Is it around land? Is it around water, food security, or both?
I think it's a combination. It's often across all of these areas. The question of land is very key. Where in Limpopo, in much of the Eastern Cape, in KwaZulu, Natal, and so on, ownership of land, very little has changed. And I don't just, I mean user rights even of the land. There isn't a great deal of change. Women would work the land. Women would have access to using it for different kinds of things and so on. But it's still predominantly in the name of the male, as opposed to in the name of the women. So I think that hasn't changed very much. I think women continue to be the producers of food, have food gardens throughout the country, but bigger plots and bigger parcels of land, there are fewer women who have access to the land than the men. What's also been interesting is accessing markets and so on. It's often the men who access the markets much more easily than the women, and the men would be the marketers and the women would often be the producers, because the men often would have access to the transport, would be the ones who in the household who would take the cattle or the livestock to the auction and so on. So once you begin to unpack power relations at household level and at community level, then you will see that it's often individual women where there would be changes and where women would be strong, powerful, and run their own economic activity and household and so on. But when you begin to look at the collective, you again see that the power relations is just replicated. The same socialization continues. Yeah, and in the Eastern Cape, certainly it's not very different to many of the other areas. So throughout the Western Cape, there would be slight differences in that we don't have the same system of traditional authorities, but it doesn't mean that in farming rural communities, poor communities, in so-called colored communities, the gender division is not the same. It's exactly the same, and the systems of patriarchy and so on is more or less, people replicate it in the same way.
Okay, Marsha, maybe we can bring Carmen on board as well, because clearly there are different experiences here. Carmen, I'm assuming you with Renee. I've tried to unmute you. Is Carmen there? Nick, can you assist?
They self-muted, so they'll need to unmute themselves. We can't unmute them. But I know Renee was having a little bit of audio trouble.
Thanks.
I'm unmuted, Elaine.
Okay, thanks, Carmen.
Can you hear me, Elaine?
Yes, you're coming through loud and clear, Carmen. Carmen, just to come back to questions that we didn't have time to address, that you had to address in your session. Netu has left us, but she wanted to know, in terms of accountability, does women on farms become responsible when it comes down to success sustainability or failure when you move away from the organizations and groups you have assisted in developing? I guess she's addressing the issue of dependency on the sort of umbrella organization.
Well, once again, it will depend from, we'll look at it from situation to situation. Obviously, we would like the groups and the women to be independent and to take ownership for their actions and their projects. But if they seek assistance, we will look at the merits of the matter and then decide to what extent we will be able to assist them. Advice we will always be able to give, but it will depend from situation.
Okay, thanks for that, Renee. I'm sorry, Carmen. I think, you know, I guess this goes to both you and Masha. In terms of just building a feminist agenda, would you recommend women organizing alone? Women being in men's groups that have the same interests at heart, food security, land and water also are shared interests for these communities? Or would you recommend both strategies? And you and Masha can take turns in answering.
Well, from our side, we'll obviously prefer that women alone because of the nature of the rural environment. It's still very much patriarchal. And we see it in joint forums. As I've mentioned earlier, women and men get together in the Farm Workers Coalition. And there, women might dominate in numbers, but in terms of articulation, the men will dominate the space. So therefore, we still see that it is necessary to organize and create separate spaces for women. But systematically, slowly, we will introduce women or allow women to operate or articulate the points or their challenges and their needs in mixed spaces.
So, okay, I think the issue of the starting point should be that we should have two kinds of organizations. I'm a believer in the collective fights around common resources like access to land, access to water, etc. But even in those campaigns and struggles, we should be, you know, the point you made earlier, we should begin to build in a woman's caucus, a woman's lobby, whatever it is. You know, if it's a campaign around water, we must be able to say that it's the girls, it's the women who are carrying the water from the rivers and the communal taps, etc., and so on. If we're fighting on sanitation, it is the girls and the women who are having this or that experience and so on. But I think that's for issues, an issue-based campaign or general campaign around access to land and bigger movements that's fighting around resources and our common goods and so on. At the same time, I think we should have separate organizations where women can have their space, where women's issues can be articulated, and where they can also find the freedom to sit with their sisters and talk about their problems and their issues, etc., and find strategies of entering into the kind of more open organization. So I see the need for both. I think that as long as we have an attitude and we build a consciousness that says men and women, poor men and women, are not enemies. Poor men and women have common issues of poverty, of access to land, and so on and so on. But at the same time, women also require space to begin to fight and to gain agency and voice so that they can fight stronger and better in the broader open organizations. So, yeah, that's my view on how this should go.
Thank you, Marsha. I'm wondering, Marsha and Carmen individually have raised key issues, and I'm wondering if any of the other participants have questions related to this. I mean, especially given, you know, there's a difference in these two organizations. Women and Farms is regionally based and located. The other organization is more nationally based and located with a greater degree of variation. So it must raise questions for you also in terms of similarities and whether this resonates with your own experiences or not in your organizations. I'm not seeing any hands up, but I just wanted to know, Marsha, how do you deal with the linguistic differences?
Yes, it's challenging. We do lots of translations. We work with headphones and systems of trying to teach each other or translate for each other. So we spend a lot of time doing that. One of the beautiful things about a national organization or a regional organization, and again I refer to not only TCOE, but when we had the Rural Women's Assembly, there was a very big emphasis on cultural exchange, cultural diversity, and to show people each other's culture so that we become both pluralistic in how we see each other as South Africans, how we see each other differently as Africans in the region, how we respect language, and people share, and they come especially dressed up to share their music, their songs, their dance, etc. So I think it's part of kind of building, I suppose, a society, a South Africa, where we can have respect for the diversity and respect for each other, for our fellow South Africans. You know, that I think is an important part. And women play an important part of this. I remember us going to Limpopo from the Western Cape with farm worker women and fishers. Carmen might remember this. And when we got to Limpopo, one of the rural women said to me, it's the first time that she is spending a night in a room with another nation. Now you can imagine this, we're all South Africans, but just for her to have traveled out of the farm in the bus to Limpopo was a kind of complete a new experience, different, and that we shared people. So I think it's powerful that we do. It's at that level where we're really going to build the alternatives, and we're going to deal with the racism and the xenophobia and so on. One important issue that perhaps could be the conversation of another session like we've done today is the question of building new forms of organization. Carmen mentioned earlier that we are both part of this Farm Worker Coalition, Farm Worker Solidarity meeting. We're part of it. And one of the most terrible experiences in this coalition is the way in which trade unionists conduct themselves. You know, completely male, completely macho, completely, their voices must resonate, they must know. And it's really so, I was going to say so macho. It's quite difficult. And so part of what we ought to be thinking about also is new organization, because women often in these spaces adopt the same persona as some of these men, and the organizations become hard. You cannot talk about rape. The Barbie issue is a good example. You cannot talk about polygamy. You cannot talk about that you've been harassed sexually, or that you cannot talk about those things because the space is not there. It must, you talk about your economic issues, and you talk about your boss, and you listen to the men and the leaders. So this issue of a different form of organization is perhaps something that we must really begin to put energy in and imagination in as feminists, as women activists.
Thank you, Masha. I'm afraid we have to end the session. Corbus, I saw some of your comments about how does one work with men to empower them to support women's issues. But I think we need to take this up at the following webinar. Hafsa has already had to leave. So I am going to thank everyone for their questions, and thank Carmen and Masha for inspirational presentations. We could talk for 2 hours. It's a pity there's no, you know, we can't physically get together, but this is a fantastic platform. And I'm going to leave it over now to Renee to just close this webinar. Thank you all for participating. We will be posting a summary of this conversation on the blog.
Thank you, Elaine, and I must echo the thanks as well to Carmen and Masha and yourself for this conversation. And I think it probably brought a lot of questions, and maybe we also need the clarification. So I'd encourage you to use the blog as a space to engage further. I think it's a space where we would be able to look at some of the questions too, which that we didn't get to. But we've noted the questions, and we'll try to bring it in either in the blog or in the next session. Speaking about the next session will be on the 2nd of December at 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and the focus there will be on HIV, AIDS, and gender-based violence. Since World AIDS Day is on the 1st, and it's also during the 16 days of activism. So I'll send out more information to everyone via email. And then also just to encourage you that some reps from organizations, Laura from Project Empower and Nazma from Red Crisis and myself will be going to Bangladesh in November and sharing and experiencing some of our work in the Meet the Change Agents process. And so we'll be communicating via the blog and other social media. So I'll please encourage you to also interact with us while we're there, as we are not going to just be taking on the organizations of what they will be doing, but also, as we previously discussed, it is a collective, and we would like to get information from people. We will be representing everybody else that have been part of the TWL series and the work that we've been doing. So thank you, everyone, and we will speak again, and we'll speak on the 2nd of December. Thank you. Thanks, Nick.